Hello and welcome to the podcast of the Prison Officers Association, the UK's largest professional union for prison, correctional and secure psychiatric workers with over 30,000 members. In this episode, we are joined by former prison officer, POA rep and author Alex South. Her book, Behind These Doors, detailing Alex's 10 years in the prison service, was published earlier this year to great acclaim from critics and readers. Extracts were serialised in the Sunday Times, and it was a BBC Radio 4 Book of the Week. Alex's writing journey was kick-started when she entered and won the Beachmore Life Writing Competition with a piece that eventually became part of her book. She also received the prestigious Winston Churchill Scholarship, which enabled her to travel and study the treatment of prison staff in other countries. Despite the prison service doing its best to keep Alex with promotions and specialist training, the desperate under-resourcing of the service meant she eventually felt unable to continue in post. Alex, can we start off by asking, how did you get involved at the Little Hay Young Offenders Institute, which was your kind of first foray into the prison service, I suppose?
Yeah, so I was 19 at the time. I'd dropped out of uni after a couple of months, and that was the year before. I think I was just feeling a bit untethered, a bit of a loss of what to do next. I think you have this idea that when you leave school, suddenly the world opens up to you more, doesn't it? And you're going to go and do all these things. But actually, none of that really happened for me. And I thought I was going to love uni, and I didn't. So I was just looking for volunteering opportunities. I just looked on I think it was called the doit.com site then. I can't remember, but it was one of the first that came up in my local area. And like a lot of people, I knew nothing about prison. I was curious about it just because it's this world you don't know anything about. And I think I've always been interested in people. I'm definitely a people person. I'm interested in what makes people tick. And I thought, well, I'll see what that's like. It sounded really exciting. You didn't need any specific qualifications to have done it. It was all about building relationships. And I thought, well, that's something I think I can do. So it was literally from a volunteering website that I clicked on, saw something I liked the look of, did the training and thought I'd give it a go. And I just loved it. I cannot rave about that organisation enough. So they still exist. They work at a few young offenders around the country. And it was the most insightful, illuminating and really encouraging thing to do at the very beginning of your career, because it showed all the positive that can happen.
So that, I suppose, opened the door to you being open to the idea of a career in that area. Can you remember how you felt then when you moved into the adult world of prisons, as it were, and you started at Whitemoor? I mean, can you recall your first day there?
Oh, I can recall it all so well. Those first few weeks were so difficult. They really were. And I remember thinking to myself then, don't ever forget this feeling. Remember how hard it is. Because there will be other people who come in and you want to treat them decently. You want to treat people the way that people treated you when you first started. I was so daunted. It's a very intimidating environment, much more so than Little Hay, because the security infrastructure is so much greater. A high security prison, being searched on the way in, the dogs, all the physical security procedures are much more intense there. So all of that was very daunting. I remember feeling as well how different I looked from other people. I was 22. There was a lot of big, burly, tattooed men who seemed to really wear their uniform with confidence, and I felt everything felt a bit big on me. And I just, I was very conscious of I can remember a prisoner saying to me, oh, well, we know you're new because your boots haven't got a mark on them and your chains are gleaming. There was not a scuff on anything. And all that kind of stuff just made me feel like I really stood out, and I was very intimidated. I was really intimidated. But having said that, the staff that I worked with treated me absolutely like one of the team from the beginning. I was given the utmost support. I was given guidance in everything. All those normal kind of fears that you have when you join any job. So you just don't know where things are. You don't know the layout. You don't know people's names. All of that is obviously magnified so much more when it's a prison. And I was just given so much support from the beginning.
I see. Looking back on it, though, is there any way in which your training could have been improved to give you an easier start?
That's a good question. I think it's difficult, and it must be hard for the training department themselves, because there's so much of this job that it's not possible to learn until you're really there. Only because it's people, isn't it? And people are so unpredictable. And then when you add into that, you're dealing with people who are often quite volatile, who've come from volatile backgrounds and who are in an environment where essentially they don't want to be. That again is magnified. So it's hard. I feel for the training department there. I don't really know what more they could have done necessarily. I think the emphasis was very much on the prisoners, as it should be, and how would you deal with various situations, the procedures that are there to support you behind different situations. And all of that was really important, but there wasn't so much sort of reflective insight on how you would feel about doing the job as an officer. I think that would probably have benefited me, and I think would benefit a lot of staff, because staff support obviously needs to be one of the main things that you're concentrating on if you want to keep people in the job. It goes without saying that people will encounter really tough situations, but feeling like they've got the resilience and the support behind them, I think would keep people in the job longer. So maybe that, but I appreciate that it's really difficult. How do you really prepare someone for that?
Yeah, always easier to have 20/20 hindsight on things like this, I think.
Exactly, yeah.
The book charts your journey as a prison officer, and you start off very optimistic, if even though the environment is very challenging, and gradually, and these will be my words, not yours, you see that mood of optimism slide not just to pessimism, but something kind of beyond pessimism, almost a kind of despair that you can't do the job that you wanted to do, you can't make the difference that you wanted to. How did that manifest itself over that 10-year period?
But it was definitely a time-bound thing. So when I started, like you say, I was really optimistic. I was very keen, and I had every reason to be. And I found all of that in the job. The things that I was hoping to do, it wasn't idealistic and it wasn't naive, because I feel like I did all those things. When I started at Whitemore, I loved it. Once I got over those first few months of it feeling very intimidating, I loved it. The emphasis was absolutely on relationships between staff and prisoners, on relationships between staff and staff. The emphasis was really people orientated, and that was where my strengths lay. And I loved it. So I think over time, when that changed, like you say, into pessimism and then something a bit more, I think the reason that challenged me was because I knew how good it could be. I felt like I was always harking back, almost like nostalgically, to this period where things had been so good. At Whitemore, it goes without saying, you're working with extremely challenging people. But I think I was there on that particular wing for about 3 years, and I can only recall 2 serious violent incidents. You consider that you're working with some of the most dangerous, in inverted commas, people in the country, such a challenging population. We were an excellent team. We did such a good job of keeping things level and helping people, I think. We really did. I really believe in that. So I think that was what made it so difficult for me to see the decline in standards and the decline in practice, because I knew how good it could be. And I think that was what stopped me from leaving, because I was very unhappy really in the last year or so, maybe even longer. But I stayed because I really believed in the work I was doing, and I really felt like, well, maybe it will get back to it. Maybe it will go back to being what it was. And there were so many people trying to implement that in a way. For example, the POA, so many people trying to reinforce these really high standards. But for me, I didn't see it, and it just became unsustainable. I was so stressed to a level that I just didn't even really know was possible. And how long do you do that for? I felt like it was impacting my life outside of work. As soon as I finished one shift, I'd be nervous about having to do the next. And I think you just reach a point where that's not what work is meant to be.
Was there one particular incident that made you think, I'm done with this? Perhaps something that happened at the Scrubs, or perhaps that meeting with the minister, which is graphically, at that point in the book, listeners, if you've not read the book, you must read the book, of course. But Alex takes her concerns to a government minister who you generously don't name, but and he was hugely disrespectful to you and the issues you were raising. And was that the point at which you thought, I'm just done now?
That was definitely a point where I thought, I can't do this anymore. I think, for a few reasons. I was very excited about that meeting, and I think that's the optimism I had right at the beginning of the job. kind of channeled into that meeting, and I thought this could be the moment. And I'd been away. I'd travelled to Texas and to Canada and to Australia. I had this incredible opportunity with the Churchill Fellowship to do all of that, and they funded me to do research in prison officer support and mental health abroad. So I'd seen this incredible focus on it in these countries. I'd seen how valued they were, and I'd seen the real focus on making sure that even when these difficult incidents happen, and the cumulative effect of that over time, that there's support there for you. And I felt like I had some really good ideas, some of it was very ambitious, but I thought it was possible. So the build up for me was really feeling quite excited to meeting that person. And when I sat with him and he said what he said, I just remember feeling really deflated and a bit stupid. I think I just thought, what was I ever really expecting? And it was so, and I tried to sort of draw on that in the book, like the real differences between physically where I was at that time. So that was a meeting in Westminster, and the offices we were in were incredible. They had this big panoramic view of London. Everything obviously was spotless. Everything was very modern. Everyone is wearing suits. It was a really cool, I've never been anywhere like that before. It was a really cool place to be. And I just spent the last few years at Scrubs, where the brickwork is literally falling apart and the buildings are over 200 years old, and there are rats running over your boots, and there are cockroaches, and prisoners are putting scouring pads in the windows and holding them in place to keep the rain out because the glass is shattered. And so I think I just felt a bit foolish, really, and thought, how was he ever going to, he's not going to get it. His working environment is so different to mine. But it was really deflating, and it was upsetting, because at that point I'd worked with so many incredible staff, and I'd seen people really suffer, and not the people that you might sort of stereotypically expect. I mean, the men were always the first running into the difficult incidents, and the men who you'd want by your side, and they were just falling apart, some of them. I remember one guy specifically saying, I said to him, I'm struggling a bit, I'm finding it hard. This was at Scrubs, and he said to me, Alex, I'm scared every day I come into work. I'm scared. And if you could see this guy, he is a massive, he looked like your stereotypical idea of a prison officer. And so it was very hard to hear someone kind of, I don't know, just ignore really what I was asking for and minimize it, because I had first-hand experience. I knew that that's not true. That's not the reality, and that people really needed what I was asking for.
I think it's a bit of a cardinal sin if you ignore people's lived experience, because they know what they're talking about. They felt it. They've gone through it, and perhaps you haven't. We'll come back to the Winston Churchill Scholarship in a little bit, if we may. But you've mentioned the POA, and obviously this is the POA podcast. So in your experience, how would you describe or sum up the role played by the POA, both kind of in prisons and in your working life as a prison officer?
Huge. I mean, I remember that from my first week at Whitemoor was when we were given a talk by the POA rep there, got a little diary, we all signed up. It was just a thread that ran through everything. It was in the background to everything when things were going well, and it was very much at the forefront when things were not going so well. I didn't see so much of that at Whitemoor because there wasn't a huge, during my time there wasn't a huge need for it, I guess. But at Scrubs, they really did work tirelessly, and it was key to pretty much everything that happened there. There was an excellent team of reps there. So I remember when we took action after a few particularly difficult incidents at Scrubs when people had been quite seriously assaulted. And I just had this real feeling of pride, this feeling of collective, very decisive action. We're doing something. We, have identified these real flaws. And obviously the POA are at the forefront of that, backing everyone, keep trying their hardest to keep people's morale high. And the framework to all of that was so much knowledge. Obviously, these men and women knew so much about the system that they were in. So they were really huge. And then when I was at Belmarsh, I became a union rep myself, which was really interesting because there was so much I didn't know about. I think in my mind, I'd always held the POA as being the people who kind of pushed for this action. And I didn't see all the stuff that went on in the background. So much to do with human resources kind of thing, and more normal staff issues that you might find in another workplace that they were working on all the time as well. So yeah, really interesting insight into another layer of prison that I didn't know so much about.
So let's return to that Winston Churchill Scholarship, which I think you applied for in 2016, 2017, and which, as you've mentioned, took you to a wide variety of countries. What were the conclusions that you drew from your research into the impact on prison officers of their working environment?
The conclusions that I drew and the things I was proposing or suggesting were predominantly focused around staff support. And there were two layers to that. So it was obviously we need to support staff. It goes without saying it's a challenging workplace. But also it's the airplane, thing where people say you've got to have your mask on first before you can help someone else. And that's very true of the prison officers' work as well. Your prison officers need to be motivated, energized. They need to have a full understanding of the work they're doing. They need to feel valued and they need to feel supported in what's really tough work at times in order to provide that support to the prisoners in their care. And it goes without saying, really. So the conclusions that I drew from that report was things like the one-on-one annual mental health checkup with officers. So obviously there was a focus at the time on physical fitness. We have our fitness test once a year. But I felt like there could be an annual one-on-one mental health checkup, which would give someone a private space to either say nothing at all or to talk if they wanted to. I think everyone's so busy, prisons can be so fast-paced, so chaotic, that having that space is not always available. And I'd asked for a review of the peer support team. I know it's different from prison to prison, but I've been in some places where it was really lacking, again, purely because the resources weren't there, because everybody was so busy and there was so much going on, such a huge spike in incidents. And I think some of the peer support workers themselves were very traumatized. So there were a few different layers to it, but it was all around the idea of providing greater emotional support to staff in order that they could then provide greater support, structure and consistency to the prisoners that they were working with. So for me, it felt very much like a win-win, if that makes sense.
So, I mean, presumably you reached those conclusions because of what you'd seen in different jurisdictions as you traveled with scholarship. So if it kind of goes without saying that if you could, you would make those changes in the prison service. But you also in the book reflect that there's a lot that the UK gets right. What is it that the UK gets right when it comes to the custodial regime?
Well, I think that our focus so much of the time is on staff and prisoner relationships, is on people. And I think that's the core of everything that you do. Certainly in the time that I was there, that was crucial. My first prisoners were out for about 8 hours a day. And obviously they go to activities and they were on the yard, but so much of that time was spent talking. So it was building relationships between each other, the prisoners with themselves. When they're out of their cells, they have time to talk, they have time to argue, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think sometimes just giving people the opportunity to air out issues or grievances or whatever it may be, rather than being stuck behind a door all the time and only having an hour a day to potentially sort something out, can be really toxic. So there was that. Having the time to talk meant that staff developed really positive relationships as well with each other. So you're working in such close proximity to people all the time. And I think building those relationships is crucial, having each other's back, knowing that you can trust each other, becoming very familiar with the different ways that people work. So you can pick up on subtle shifts or changes, or you can notice things perhaps before a prisoner might. Obviously these environments can be really exploitative sometimes. So that was crucial. So relationships between prisoners, relationships between staff, and then obviously, fundamentally, relationships between staff and prisoners. That was fundamental to everything when I was there. And, sadly, that just declined over time. I don't think it was any one decision or any one person's fault, but the huge rise in violence and suicide and self-harm meant that obviously everyone's attention and everyone's resources were going to that. And people were behind their doors so much more. And there was a huge correlation in the things that went on to happen in the violence, etc. So for me, the best part of the job and the thing where I saw really positive impact happening, and that is not just between staff and prisoners, but on staff morale, that was all related to just having the time to talk to each other, to be around each other and to build relationships.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me, obviously as an absolutely outside observer, that we have indeed lost our way, because those points of strength and potential strength and actual strength in the past have been frustrated and undermined by the fact that there isn't the resource. And you get situations such as the one you described at the Scrubs, where the intention was there to maximize that contact and to, as part of a rehabilitation, as well as a survival care and maintenance feature, but there just weren't the resources to control the situation or to deliver that outcome. And inevitably that then translates into a message that says the resourcing model is wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I completely agree with that. And it's so difficult, isn't it? Because I know that sometimes there's this popular sort of rhetoric outside that people should be punished and lock them up and throw away the key. But I think if you actually talk to people, I don't know how true that is. I don't know if people really feel that way. I think ultimately what everyone wants is to feel safe. You want to feel safe on the streets. You want society to be a safer place. And the reality is that the overwhelming majority of prisoners are released. I think we only have about 65 or 6 natural lifers, in a population of 87,000. People are getting out. And so, how do you want them to feel when they do? And what do you want their experience of prison to be in order so that they do feel like they have something to offer? And I think it's so much of it is common sense. I don't know that you need huge swathes of kind of research and everything to figure it out. I think a lot of it is, well, if you put someone in a dark, dirty room with vermin and cockroaches where the rain is coming in, where it's poorly ventilated, with nothing to do for 23 hours a day, how do you think they're going to feel when they come out? I just think it's very basic. And for the staff who obviously are then trying to cope with sometimes really horrific incidents when they do come out, that burst of energy and anger, and I would feel angry. I think anyone would in that situation, just rage and complete despair from some of these guys locked up. And then staff are trying to control sometimes that just explosion of violence. How are they feeling? Are people then feeling motivated and excited and ready to get back to work and follow that thread of I'm doing something good and there's a reason I'm here? Because that's how I felt when I started. I felt really enthusiastic about work. But if those are the conditions that we're asking people to live in, and if those are the conditions that we're asking people to work in, what do people expect the outcome to be? I think it's quite obvious. I think it's quite basic. So yeah, I agree that loss of resources has just been devastating, really.
The prison service did their best to keep you, as it were, in the sense that you were promoted twice, you were put forward for specialist training, particularly in terms of, I think, resolving what are called hostage situations, to be a negotiator to try and resolve those. But you clearly never lost the desire for learning. And I'm interested that you went back to university despite it not having worked for you the first time round. What persuaded you to do that?
I'm just, I'm a bit of a nerd, I love stuff like that. And always have done. I think just uni, the physical, the whole culture of it and the nightlife culture just wasn't very me. I didn't cope so well with that, but I think comes back to like that interest in people. I love learning. That's my thing. And I love getting to know people, and university was a way to do that, but to do it whilst working full time as well. And yeah, in terms of the opportunities I was offered by the prison service, I had such great management my whole career. I really did work with some excellent managers, from senior officers all the way up to governors. At every jail I've been at have been outstanding. And that is 100% the reason that I stayed for as long as I did, that and hoping that it would get back to the way it was. I think learning is is a fundamental need for all of us, really, in some way. I think people just need to feel like there's something else, if that makes sense. You've got something else to do.
Well, life's a learning curve. You never stop learning it. It's a question of what you learn and how you learn it, I suppose. I suppose. But then it seems to me, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that the Beachmore Life Writing Competition was a big thing. I mean, maybe not at the time, but in hindsight, it was. How did you find out about that? What did you have to do to win it?
It was during the pandemic. It was the first lockdown. I was at home all the time because I'd fallen pregnant, so I wasn't in. The prison officers were great and said just stay home. So I was writing a lot, and I'd found the last year really tough. So it just felt, I don't know what the word is. I don't want to say therapeutic, really. I feel like everyone says that, but it felt like I was, I don't know, kind of like purging something, putting it on the page. And I'd had so many great experiences as well as difficult ones, and it seemed a shame to lose that. So I was just putting things on the page and really enjoying doing it. And I just thought that something I'd written was pretty good. So I thought I'd see if there was any writing competitions.
Excellent. I mean, your judgment was spot on because this was a very high profile competition and you did win. And reading your winning entry, it's clearly stuff that then found its way into your book.
Yeah.
Behind These Doors. So that must have been the start of what ended up as the publication of your book.
Yeah. So one of the judges contacted me afterwards and asked if I'd thought about writing a book, which I had thought about, but I didn't know how to do it, and I don't have like a degree in creative writing or anything. I didn't have any of that background. I was conscious of that. I think sometimes you think that you need specific qualifications to be able to do stuff, or I definitely did, and I was aware that I didn't have it. But she gave me some really good tips, and it took me a long time, I think, to sort of find my voice and not try and imitate other people and my style of writing and stuff. But I really enjoyed doing it, and it felt really important because the book is just obviously just my experience over those 10 years. But I know that there are so many other people who have their own versions of these stories and these experiences. And there's so much great literature out there about prison, so much really interesting stuff. And a lot of it understandably comes from the prisoner's perspective. And that's really interesting as well. But I feel like there's a little bit of a deficit from staff, and the staff perspective is so important. And I didn't want to lose that.
No, well, I think that is very much the unique kind of selling point of the book. And in reviews and interviews I've seen, I think you've said that you saw the book as a way of trying to effect the change or advertise the good in a different way to remaining in the system as a prison officer. In the response to the book, do you feel that's something you've made progress towards?
I hope so. I mean, I know that obviously people are picking up on the difficult bits of it, and the particularly, I don't know, obviously you can't write a book about prison without talking about violence. And obviously that has been picked up on, and I get that completely, that's what people may find interesting. But like you said, I really hope that it celebrates the good in prison. I really hope that it celebrates the incredible work that the majority of our prison officers are doing, because it's amazing what people are doing. And in spite of really tough circumstances where you don't have much time and prisoners aren't out of their cells enough and people are extremely stressed, and they're still doing this incredible work. And I couldn't sustain it myself. But there are so many other people just doing amazing stuff. And so I really hope that the book celebrates the optimism that you find in prison, as well as all the difficult stuff. People who keep showing up day in, day out. And some of the prisoners that I've worked with as well, in pretty horrendous circumstances, who keep going and who really persist and who are very committed to their own change. I think the other stories are the ones that we think might make the headlines more and we think people might be more interested in. But I think that does a disservice to all the good. So I hope that the book does kind of power that a bit more.
You must have had some very interesting reactions to it. I mean, certainly there's been an awful lot of publicity. So in terms of reaching people and informing people of a world that they kind of only knew very little about, but there's a tick in that box for sure. And that then provides the environment in which discussions are possible that lead to positive change, I suppose.
Yeah, I really, really hope so. I think people deserve to know more about this world. I think it's a shame for it to be secretive and possibly a bit dangerous as well. I think we have a good reason to be invested in what goes on because, like I said, these people are being released into our community. So it makes sense for us to know the conditions that they're being kept in, and for staff as well to know the conditions that we're asking people to work in. We're asking people to do really transformative, meaningful work, and we're asking them to do it in a very time-bound and sometimes very challenging environment. So I think it's right that people should know, and I hope that it surprises people in good ways as well as bad.
Well, Alex, one final question, and that is, what's next?
I have no idea. I'm really, really excited. I really enjoyed writing the book. I'd love to do a bit more writing, but I don't know what's next. I do think, actually, I was thinking about this the other day. I'd really like to go back to Trailblazers, which was the organisation that I volunteered with. I think I'd like to get back to doing that kind of thing, but without the pressure or the responsibility of the uniform, maybe.
Alex, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Behind These Doors, Stories of Strength, Suffering and Survival in Prison by Alex South is published by Hodder and Stoughton and is also available as an audio book. The recommendations and policy ideas we discussed during our conversation are, of course, Alex's own thinking rather than POA policy. For the latest union news, and to join if you are not already a member, visit poauk.org.uk, and you can also follow the union on social media. Thank you for listening. We hope that you like what you have heard and will join us for the next episode of the POA podcast. Until then, thank you and goodbye.